Anyway, we're going to start with a little story because over the years I've known ever so many beekeepers, or seen ever so many beekeepers who've simply just cut out queen cells or squashed them or whatever when they see them. Even sometimes quite experienced beekeepers. And it has always concerned me because I hadn't bothered to check to see what's happening in the colony. Anyway, I was quite concerned about it, and it seems, if anything, to be getting worse. So I put this talk together for the National Honey Show, the Beginners program, 2023. And listening to me was somebody who'd been keeping bees for 57 years. Why he was in the Beginners program, I've no idea, but he was. And he said to me afterwards, he said, look, he said, there's so much stuff in there that really you ought to be addressing more experienced beekeepers. So that's how it is. That's how we're here. Anyway, most of you probably know about Dave Cushman's website that I now own and run it. There are still quite a lot of beekeepers that don't know why, but that's modern beekeeping, I suppose. There's quite a lot of good sound information on there, and I'm going to be referring to it on a few occasions tonight. I'm also the author of 5 books, which I'm not going to make too much of an issue of, but there they are. And that one there, Beekeeping, Challenge What You're Told, I wrote because over the years, there are ever so many things that you come across as a beekeeper that you're told as absolute fact, and you get your nose stuck in a beehive and the bees are telling you something very differently. Now, some of the things that you will hear this evening are actually in that book. It's not that I'm saying anything's wrong. I'm just saying that it's not necessarily right. So, queen cells. What I normally do when I speak to a live audience is I ask them to put their hands up if they think they're good or bad news. Obviously, I can't do that when we're virtual, but just think to yourself, sitting wherever you are, if indeed you're sitting, do you actually think they're good news or bad news? Now, they can be in any colony at any time, and the time has been extended. I've seen them fairly regularly right into November, and on quite a lot of occasions I've seen them in March. I saw one supersedure cell in a colony last Saturday, and that's only halfway through April, and that was one of last year's queens. Now, queen cells are often missed for several reasons, one of which is the beekeeper perhaps not expecting them. And the bees hiding them too, and they can do a very good job of hiding them. We just got to make sure that we find them. There are a huge number of myths, and call them fallacies if you like, and misinformation about queen cells. And unfortunately, these days, when there's a lot of cut and paste, they tend to be repeated quite a bit. So, of course, if something's seen in several places, it's taken as being absolute fact by some people. Now, there are natural ones which the bees build themselves, and they're the ones I'm going to concentrate on this evening. But there are also what one might term artificial ones, where we actually manage the building of them and help the bees do what they would do naturally. They're done for a reason, usually queen rearing. But I will ignore them this evening, just to let you know that they are there. Now, having kept bees for 60 years, natural queen cells used to be fairly consistent. You could rely on them; they were predictable, but that's no longer the case. Usually because of what I call the queen problems. Now, these are a series of problems that have appeared since about the turn of the century. I'm afraid some people still ignore them and assume they're not in existence, but I can assure you they very much are. There are 3 problems mainly. Supersedure of young queens, where it used to be naturally, it's the older queens that get superseded. Queens failing during the summer and queens simply disappearing. You go to a colony and everything's fine. Queen's laying away, and you go there the next inspection, 7, 10, 14 days later or whatever. Queen's gone, been gone several days. Sometimes there's emergency cells, sometimes they're not. There's not. So they're the three main things. They usually involve queen cells, and these problems are actually very common. I see them on a very regular basis. My own bees, those at the Whisper Green Teaching Apiary, where I'm the apiary manager and do some of the demonstrating, and also quite a lot of other beekeepers that I go to as well. And I do get invited to other beekeeping associations to demonstrate their teaching apiaries, and I very often see these problems there too. I know they're universal. I've seen them myself in other countries, and I'm in contact with other beekeepers, excuse me, elsewhere who've got exactly the same problems. Now, because they're denied by quite a lot of people, they're not well documented. Therefore, they're not taught either. So, of course, the ordinary beekeeper is not aware of them. I have got a page on Dave Cushman's website, and if you read through that, it's just called Queen Problems, I think. If you read through that, if you've been keeping bees any length of time and you wonder why certain things have happened, I'm fairly certain that you can have a look at that and you say, oh yeah, I recognize that. You may well have thought that it was just natural. It isn't. In, I believe it was 2018, 2017, 2018, I gave a lecture at the National Honey Show, and that's been videoed, and that's online, quite high numbers of viewing, and it's called What's Going Wrong with Our Queens. Now, because these queen cells are in the colony, they tend to be misleading simply because there's no reasoning or description in the books, and people think it's a natural phenomenon, and they may well get things right. It may well, for argument's sake, be a supersedure. Well, the books say that supersedure shouldn't happen that time of the year, so people assume there's swarm cells or whatever. What I suggest you do is that you read the page on Cushman's website, learn about the things that are happening, try to understand what's going on, but please, please, please don't ignore it, because I think you will actually learn quite a lot, certainly from the observational point of view. Now, in some instances, it could be terminal on the colony, so you need to be aware of what's going on and probably inspect your bees, perhaps a little bit more than you would normally. Queen cells, I don't think, are understood anywhere enough, and that's throughout beekeeping, right from the beginners right up to the very experienced people. So, what do most people do when they see queen cells? Well, when I ask this in a large audience, I know what people are going to say, so I put it up predictively on the screen, and that's what happens, isn't it? Press a panic button, and that, of course, is the reason for the presentation this evening. I asked the question why, because in my book they're not always bad news, and in certain circumstances they can be excellent opportunities, which we'll discuss some of those a little bit later on. Why panic anyway? Well, it's probably because teachers and writers give poor information, perhaps a lack of depth, and they don't fully understand the queen cells themselves, why they're there, how the bees build them, or anything of that nature. So, of course, they can't write about it or teach it. Therefore, I think overall throughout beekeeping, there's probably quite poor understanding. Very often misidentification for the reasons that, or partly for the reasons I said. Others, because we're told that queen cells are always in certain places when they may not be. This, of course, leads to confusion, which then means very often that somebody treats something perhaps in the wrong way. These days, a lot of people are concerned that they will lose their queen. So perhaps go off with a swarm or something like that. Some people have got a sort of relationship with a queen, whether they've ever seen it or not, and that, of course, is another issue that I could spend hours talking about, finding queens or not finding queens. We're often told that natural queen cells are bad, or they result in poor queens, blah blah blah. You end up with scrub queens and all sorts of things like that. Well, that's not always my experience. I suggest very strongly you just keep calm, don't panic, just have a look, try and find out what's happening in the colony, and then deal with it accordingly. Carl tended to suggest that I've got a few personal views, one of which is, in my view, there's far more twaddle spoken or written about queen cells than anything else in beekeeping. And I have to say there's quite a lot of twaddle spoken and written about all aspects of beekeeping. So you can guess what my thoughts are regarding queen cells. Well, let's try and spend a little bit of time putting that right in the time we got available. Queen cell development, life cycle, if you like, I think it's very important. I treat it as one of what I call the basics. So effectively, the sort of factual things that are not based on opinion. And it's something that I think all beekeepers need to know. Many, unfortunately, don't, or they don't see the relevance. Even quite experienced beekeepers, and when I say experienced, people have been keeping bees 5, 10, 15, or even 20 years. A few years ago, I came across a couple, and actually they were both doctors. They've been keeping bees 35 years, and neither of them knew the life cycle of the queen. And these things do happen in beekeeping. Personally, I think it's crucial for the management of the colony, so you manage your bees efficiently. Certainly for swarm control and other things of that nature. It also gives you an idea when to inspect your colony next, and perhaps an idea of what you may find when you get there. Okay, in beekeeping, you are dealing with biology, and bees do tend to do things differently than what you expect them to do. But part of the art of the craft is really to try and find out what the bees are doing and help them by your management methods, however you manage a colony. If you get it wrong, it could mean a lost swarm, and a lost swarm, of course, can mean several things. You may lose a valuable queen that may well be replaced by a poorer one. You've probably lost your honey crop for the season. And all you've done really is probably help somebody else become a beekeeper that may not want to become a beekeeper because they've got a chimney full of your bees. So let's just briefly look at the queen's life cycle. I would hope that most of the people viewing know it, but just to recap. On day 0, the egg is laid. Now, one word of warning, a lot of books and sources will call today as day 1. The problem is you add days to that and you can be a day out. And especially if you mix up 2 different management techniques, you may well end up with a queen emerging a day earlier than you think. So I always take it as day 0. After 3 days, the egg hatches into a larva, although technically it's not hatching, although we as beekeepers say hatching, because of the type of egg, it's termed eclosing. So it's an egg for 3 days. After 8 or 9 days, the queen cell is sealed. So it's a larva for 5, possibly 6 days. And then after 15 to 16 days, the queen emerges. So it is a pupa for 6, possibly 7 days. Now, why I say 8 to 9 and 5 is 15 and 16 is because we are dealing with biology. Bees can move it slightly. I think probably they'll pinch a day, but they might add a couple of days on the other end. And certainly when queen emerging, on many occasions I've had them emerge 4 days overdue, but I don't think I'll pinch any more than a day or half a day. So I tend to go on the cautious side because I had so many instances where I thought I worked things out and the queen had already emerged. If you aren't sure or you're a beginner, then just write these things down on a card, pin them on the inside of a hive roof so that you've got them there until you can remember them. Now, at the hive and even going to the hive, observation is very important because with observation, of course, you're interpreting what you see. Because observation isn't just seeing things. In beekeeping terms, seeing is capturing the sight of something, and observation is analysing what you see and reaching a conclusion. So hence the interpret. I'm afraid you can go to a beekeeping meeting and you can see quite a lot of beekeepers that simply gawk and they just mouth open and, wow, isn't that wonderful? And you ask them what's wonderful and they can't tell you. They're not really, they're seeing things on a comb or in a hive, but they're not really observing and taking in what the bees are trying to tell them. And I think these people miss out quite a lot. So if you are a gawker, then try and get over the gawking bit. If you see somebody else as a gawker, just have a little word with them. So observation, to me, it goes with lateral thinking and knowledge. And knowledge may not be just book knowledge. It could be what you build up as a result of spending a lot of time looking at bees, observing them and seeing what they're telling you. You really need to know in beekeeping what should happen in perhaps 2 days' time or 5 or 7 or 14 days' time or whatever. And of course, you can only do that by seeing what the bees are doing. Every time you go to a colony of bees, even before you get there, sometimes it's telling you something. It's telling you something all the time. Even if all they're saying is nothing wrong with us, clear off and go and annoy another colony. They are telling you something. But of course, we need to understand what it is they're telling us. We're specifically talking about queen cells tonight, or I am. They can mean several things, and they're not always likely to be what you first thought. Sometimes you just look at 1 or 2 queen cells and you think, oh, yeah, this is going to happen. Go through another 2 or 3 frames and you've got more information which will help you come to perhaps a different conclusion. Bees build queen cells naturally for 3 different reasons. They build what we call swarm cells, which is for reproduction of the colony. Emergency cells are where the queen goes absent, or supersedure cells, which are effectively queen replacement. Now, unfortunately, they're frowned upon by a very small number of beekeepers, very often in influential positions, telling people, oh, they're rubbish, get rid of them, blah, blah, blah. Hence, I think, probably why a lot of people simply destroy them, because they've just got that sort of mindset. I think we need to change culture just a little bit. Queen cells can tell you an awful lot about what's happening inside the colony. So they're great sources of information if you can work out what it is the bees are trying to tell you. What they do, of course, is contain the future of the colony genetically. Well, the future physically, of course, and genetically, because it could be the behaviour or the productivity, or perhaps the adaptability or the ability to live under our rather fickle climate. And I'm afraid not all bees are able to do that. So let's find out just a little bit about them if we can. So some standard information that just keeps trotting out, and very often you see it online too, can be unreliable. Some of it doesn't always come from this country. Some perhaps comes from abroad, where conditions are rather different than ours. We talk about different queen cell types, their identification, the possible reasons for them being there, which may not always be obvious, and whether they are good or bad news, which is the purpose of the presentation in the first place. So we go for swarm cells first. These are built from cell cups right from the very start. So the egg is laid in a cell cup. Number-wise can be anywhere between about 5 and over 30. 5 is on the low side. In my experience, they're usually perhaps between about 8 and 20. Although I have seen a lot more than 30. And I helped somebody take 119 out of a colony on one occasion, and that was just a single brood chamber WBC. So there was an average of 19 queen cells on each frame, if you think about it. Now, we're often told that swarm cells are along the bottom of the comb and or up the sides. That, I think, is very, very unreliable. They can be anywhere on the comb. So don't take too much notice of that. And they can be anywhere in the brood nest too. So wherever you've got a frame of brood, you're likely to have swarm cells. Now, the queen lays in them staggered. I find usually over about 5 to 7 days, although that can vary quite a bit. I think 7 days is probably the tops, might be 8 perhaps. Now, I have seen them down to as low as 2. Why that is, I don't know. It's from a human point of view, it's obviously why they stagger them, but why the variation, that's what I mean. Now, I live in West Sussex, so it's fairly close to the English Channel. So it is a bit warmer than it is further up country. But in my area, swarm cells are usually seen between about early May and end of June naturally. I mean naturally. Now, I know there are other parts of the country, especially where it's marginal for bees, where you just don't see queen cells in May at all. So that is going to be variable. So if you are watching or even watching the recording, then please take that into account. And that, of course, is one of the problems, I think, with books, because it's sort of beekeeping by numbers rather than for your own district. Outside of that, may well be beekeeper induced, which could be simple things like keeping hives in full sun, which I think is a trigger for swarming, and also perhaps not adding enough supers early enough. So just because a colony is putting up swarm cells doesn't mean to say that it's a swarmy colony. It could be the beekeeper. Try to avoid odd shapes or long ones if you can, which I will discuss, I think, later on. So swarm cells then, are they good news or bad news? Well, they may be from a swarmy stock. might be a little bit unhealthy. Perhaps they come from a colony that's got a chalk brood or sac brood. They may well be unsuited to our rather fickle climate, and perhaps they come from a defensive stock. But on the other hand, so can all other queen cells anyway. Now, in my experience, the more queen cells are built at the time of swarming, that is, when the first one is sealed, in my experience, the more swarmy it is. And what I mean by that is when the first queen cell is sealed, if you've got two colonies side by side, one's got, let's say, 8 queen cells in and the other's got 25, I would expect the one with 25 to be a more swarmy colony. So if everything is equal, then I would probably use the queen cells from the one with only 8. Now, they could be beekeeper induced, which I've already mentioned. I think you can assume that the quality of queens from swarm cells is usually pretty good. You're not going to get tiny queens unless, of course, the queen cells are poor and the beekeeper has ripped out all the good ones and just left a poor one. When do bees build them? Usually when the conditions are good. So you should have nectar coming in to provide the food, and you should have plenty of bees to make sure that the queen cells are have got good nutrition, they're looked after properly, and that sort of thing. So are they good or bad news? Well, I think there's a bit of both there. Supersedure cells are individually, they look the same. They're also from cups. So the queen lays in the cup. Now, this is my terminology, nobody else's, usually 1, often 2, and occasionally 3. And what I mean by that is they're usually small numbers. Well, they're always small numbers, and there's more likelihood of being 1 rather than 3. So usually, in my experience, 1 or 2, but you do occasionally go into 3. We're often told that they're always on the face of the comb. Don't believe it. Yes, they can be, but it can be anywhere else as well. On many occasions, I've seen them even on woodwork, on the side of the frame. I've also seen quite a lot on frames with no brood on, so food combs. So it's surprising what bees will do if you just let them get on with it. Now, they're usually close together in the brood nest. And what I mean by that is if they're on a comb, they'll usually be on the same side of a comb or perhaps in the same seam. Very often only a couple of inches or so apart. Now, supersedure cells will always be of a similar age, so you won't get the staggering like you get in swarm cells. Used to be towards the end of the year. In my part of the country, the middle of July, perhaps right through to early September. And that will be natural. That's what I call natural supersedure. But unfortunately now, very often during the summer with young queens, which I've already told you about, you've got the opportunity to go and read. So are supersedure cells good or bad news? Well, the good news is if after the end of July, they're likely to be natural, and that would that's just the bees replacing the older queens. With natural supersedure, certainly 30 or more years ago, you very often found mother and daughter laying usually on the same comb, not far apart, in the spring. So that's sort of 6-7 months afterwards. Very, very rarely would you get swarming with natural supersedure. Occasionally, especially if it was an early supersedure, you might get one come out, but very, very rarely. The bad news is, if before the end of July, then it's likely to be a young queen. And this can also be later in the season too. So, and that's one of the reasons that I've had them right up to November with the current year's queen. So often young queens. Now, for some strange reason, when this happens, the mother very, very rarely stays. She seems to die off very, very quickly. Now, one of the problems is, of course, and this happens regularly, is if the colony is strong enough and the weather's fine and that sort of thing, the colony could swarm on the supersedure cell. And that, I think, is one of the reasons that very often you have a failing queen in a swarm these days. Never ever used to, but I think that's why. Well, the good or bad news? Well, again, we've got both. Emergency cells are built on worker larvae because, of course, the queen is gone, so she can't lay in the cups. So what the bees do is convert worker larvae, which are up until 5 days old, we're told they are almost identical. They try to use new comb or larva on new comb if at all possible, or perhaps an edge. In human terms, this is presumably so that they can chew the comb down easier rather than older comb that's got a lot of cocoons in. Now, in my experience, there's a similar number to what the colony will build if they were building swarm cells. So if perhaps they build a dozen swarm cells, they'll build around about a dozen emergency cells. I've removed several hundred what I call free living colonies, so out of trees, buildings, and that sort of thing. And where in a managed colony, you can see evidence of emergency cells, even a couple of 3 years later in combs, the bees don't sort of repair them. I've never, ever seen that in a free living colony. So my guess is that it's just something that happens because of perhaps something the beekeeper's done. Now, I believe emergency cells are very badly misunderstood. And one of the things that keeps cropping up is that once you take a queen or a queen goes missing or you take a queen away from a colony, the bees start emergency cells all at the same time. Through observation, I found that wasn't the case, but I also did a small experiment, which I wrote up for BBKA News in October 2019. And that was where 4 colonies, and they were all over the place. So that's why I think they are badly misunderstood. Now, in my book, emergency cells, if you are careful, the ones you select can be very good. I've had some cracking queens from emergency cells, and I wouldn't hesitate if they were looked after and they were good looking cells. Now, usually they're caused by the beekeeper because, of course, they're not seen in the wild, or I haven't seen them in the wild. That could be a management issue. Perhaps have taken the queen away for a particular reason. Perhaps you wanted the emergency cells in the first place, or it could be beekeeper error. Perhaps killed a queen, maimed a queen, waved a frame around, as very often beekeepers do, without seeing where the queen is, dropped off on the ground, and either got trodden on or couldn't get back home. So are emergency cells good or bad news? Well, the good news is, if you know the reason, then obviously they're expected. It's probably something you've managed from start to finish. So that's probably okay. You can then, if you've got good queen cells from a good colony, keep them, make use of them, and you've got fresh queens. The bad news, or some of it, is if you don't know the reason, unexpected. It could be something that you've done, or perhaps occasionally something that's happened with one of the queen problems. Perhaps the queen's disappeared for whatever reason. If you have poor queen cells, small ones, or scrubby little things, then obviously you're going to have a problem. But you're going to have a problem anyway if you have poor queen cells. Again, good or bad news? Well, of course, there's both. So just to recap, with swarm cells, their queen cells are right from the start, so from cups. More than 5, could be 30 or more, built anywhere on the comb. Supersedure cells, individually, they'll look the same as swarm cells. So from cups, 1 to 3, all the same age, and or similar age, let's say hour or so difference. Naturally, you see them in the autumn, often in the summer these days, unfortunately. And emergency cells, they're built if the queen goes missing, converted from existing worker larvae, built from the midrib, or obviously where the queen laid the eggs. Now the bees prefer new comb and an edge, so they're easy to identify. If you really want to go a little bit further, BIBBA have got a video, queen cells are recognition and uses, and that's online. Have a look at that because it goes into it in more depth. So queen cell identification, you need to see what's happening in the colony. And of course, you can only do it if you open it, you have a look at the frames and see what the bees are telling you. So look at the signs, not at the books. Books are brilliant at getting you into trouble, but they're none too special at getting you out of it. So they may give you the different answer or even the wrong answer. I'm going to show you now some examples of the sort of things that you can see in a colony almost at any time during the summer. So here's a single queen cell. You can see it's from a cup because of where it is. Now, individually, that could be a swarm or a supersedure cell, individually. But which one? Well, it depends on the number and the age of them, not the position on the comb. These are all swarm cells because of 4 of them. They're on the face of the comb. So straight away, they're not going to be supersedure cells. There they are. There's more of them. There's 5 on that, I think. Yep, 5. Number on the edge, look. These are supersedure queen cells. I know that because I remember the colony they came out, even though it was 10 years or so ago. Where are they? They're on the bottom of the comb because that's a sidebar towards the right and the bottom bars towards the left. They are close together. There was only 2 of them, and you can see that they're very close age-wise because the bees have started thinning down the tips. Both of those look really good queen cells. This is an emergency cell, so you can see that's coming from the midrib, and there are some more that are built from the midrib. Now you see the top one there is sealed, probably the bottom one is as well, but the other 3 look roughly the same age. And of course, people assume that the ones that are sealed first are the ones that were started first on older larvae. That, in my experience, is very, very unlikely. It's just that they started them first and the others might have been a day or 2 behind. That's all, because in my experience, bees first time round always use larvae of the right age. What happens is very often that we're told to cut them out. The bees build more that are older, and they're the ones that are poor. These are also emergency cells, but in a different place. They're on the edge of the comb. So when you find queen cells, please, please, please don't panic anymore. So we'll get rid of the button for you. Don't destroy any at all. not immediately anyway. And yes, I've seen many people just pinch them out, pinch them out, pinch them out. I've got to get rid of them, got to get rid of them. They're bad news. Don't do that. See what the bees are telling you, the state of the colony, the state of the brood. See what the bees are and the age of the brood. See what the bees are telling you. And then decide what type they are. They're likely to be either swarm or supersedure or emergency. Emergency, of course, are easy enough to identify. Now, what I say to everybody is that go through the colony, assess on the way out, get to the other side, decide what the colony is telling you, and then action on the way back. And that could be any one of a number of things. It could be that you've got a really good colony there, and you may decide to use the queen cells elsewhere. Well, then you cut them out with quite a large piece of comb so that you can handle it by the comb. But if it's a poor colony, and let's say you want to reduce it to one queen cell or take them all out, then just rip the lot out. I suggest very strongly you shake all the frames too, because you can very soon miss them. Now, queen cells could be anywhere in the hive, anywhere. And I've already mentioned that some of them sometimes I've seen on combs of food with no brood on. Now, occasionally you can get two types of queen cell in the same colony. If that is the case, it's likely to be something the beekeeper's done, such as taken the or removed most of the queen cells, the queen gone, and the bees decide to replace with emergency cells. So you'll probably get emergency cells and swarm cells in the same colony at the same time. We're very often told to leave two queen cells. I suggest you only leave one, because if you leave two, then if the colony's in the right condition, the weather's right, it's very likely that the colony will swarm on the first one out. If it's a small colony, 3 or 4 frame nuke or something like that, you'll be safe. Now, I did say they can be anywhere. There's two there on the underside of a wire queen excluder. So just be careful and look everywhere. And the books won't tell you what kind of queen cells they were. They can also be horizontal, like that one. There's the bottom bar of the frame there. And this again is against all the people that tell you that, religiously tell you that queen cells hang downwards. Not all of them. I suggest you shake. I have to say I'm very opposed to shaking inside the box, because I can remember, I think 5 queens being killed in my 60 years of beekeeping. 2 of them were on the same day by demonstrators, not ours at Whisper Green, by the way, visiting demonstrators, and 2 of them, and they both killed or maimed a queen with the shaking down inside. So that's why I shake over the top. You can do it that way, or you can do it that way. Really doesn't matter. Both of those were taken at Whisper Green teaching apiary. You need to be careful, like very careful. That frame there with the bees on, when the bees were shaken off, that's what was underneath. So that's quite a large queen cell, and that could easily be missed. Don't be frightened of shaking the bees off. Same again. And this one, there's only 2 bees on it, look. But it's a tiny queen cell. It will probably be missed by quite a lot of people, even by looking at it. I'd probably think it's a drone cell, but in fact it's a queen cell. That will probably end up being a poor queen. Now, if you leave a a decent queen cell and you think, I've left a decent one, if that one emerges first, the chances are the colony will swarm on that one and leave this little one behind. On that one, there's only one bee covering the queen cell, and there it is. Look, so you've got to be very, very careful. So shake the bees off. You have been warned. Also, this is a comb underneath frame, and there are at least 4 queen cells there. Okay, they're not sealed yet. Now that frame was in a polynuke, and unfortunately, some of the polynukes have got a much bigger gap underneath the frame, between the frame and the floor, than they should have. And of course, bees build this. And if you think or you're told that nukes can't swarm, don't believe it. Oh yes, they can, and there's the evidence. So, general bad news: queen cells that are raised under poor conditions, such as a small colony or even a slightly bigger colony that's sparsely populated with bees, is probably not the best news. If that's all you've got, then you will probably produce a queen. It may well be a stopgap, though. Small queen cells are the type that I've shown you. Long queen cells, I don't know how many times I've seen these, and people seem to think they're going to get much bigger queens out of them. But in fact, what happens is that the larva, not the pupa, as a lot of people think, but the larva drops away from the food further and further. So, of course, the bees, before sealing, extend the side walls of the cells. If you see one that's a peanut shaped, whatever it is, just rip it out, because you'll never get anything decent out of that. If you get, or let's put it this way, if I get more than 15 to 18 queen cells in a colony, I probably wouldn't use them, because in my area with my bees, that would tend to suggest they're a little bit swarmy. With my own bees, I've modified their swarming habits quite a bit. I used to, 25 years ago, I used to have 18 as the barrier. Anything over that, and I wouldn't use. Anything under, I would. Now I'm down to about 12, because I have improved the swarmability of the bees, or lack of swarmability of the bees, if you want me to put it correctly. There's no point raising queens from poor stock, other than if it's a stopgap situation. If it's getting towards the end of the season and that's all you've got available, then do it, because it will probably get the colony through the winter, and then mark it down for requeening early in the spring. And emergency cells raised after some have been removed. I did mention this earlier. In my experience, if you take a queen away from a colony, or a queen is removed for whatever reason, then the bees don't start them all at the same time, but they usually start them on the right age larva. But if you take some of them out after 4 or 5 days, or whatever you're supposed to do, then of course you've got older larvae, and the bees tend to panic, and they're the ones that are on poorer, older larvae, really end up with poorer queens. So there's a small queen cell. You can see the top bar there, and a lot of beekeepers I would forgive for thinking that's a drone cell, but in fact is a queen cell. Would produce a queen, but probably not much bigger than a worker. There's another one there on the face of a comb. Both of those last two can easily be missed. And I would suggest, but I don't know, that they were probably built after others were cut out, and that's all that the bees had to use. If you are looking at queen cells, that I think is probably a fairly decent size, about the size of 50 pence piece. This is what I mean, a peanut shape. They're wasted away like that. You'll never get a decent queen out of that, if indeed a queen at all. So just hoof them out, and I wouldn't blame you. If that's all you got, I'd still hoof it out, quite frankly, because I've seen so many poor ones. I think the reason in that case is that that comb's pretty old and pretty grim, and it might have been in a colony that's all the bees had. So I don't know. I don't even remember taking the photograph. So remember, bees naturally raise good queens. It's not in their best interest to raise poor queens. So for anything from a natural queen cell should be okay. Poor queen cells usually result from something the beekeeper's done. It may be accidental or it may be something daft, but we all know what beekeepers are capable of doing, or some beekeepers. Try to identify the queen cell type if you can, because that is very important. It will tell you a lot about what's happening inside the colony. One, of course, is that if you've got emergency cells, you haven't got a queen. If you've got either supersedure or swarm, then you may have a queen. So try and find the reason that you've got those queen cells. Manage a colony accordingly, because you might do it very, very differently if you've got supersedure cells, let's say, rather than swarm cells. And whatever you do in beekeeping, try to keep it simple, because I find that you've usually got a get out of jail card and the up your sleeve, and the bees always keep things simple. They don't make things complicated like some of the methods that I see peddled these days. Other than that, everything should be okay. That's it, folks. Thanks very much for listening, and I see there's one or two questions coming. So over to you, Gareth.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Roger.
Do you want me to unshare?
You can, stop sharing your screen.
Stop
and then
sharing,
we'll be visible. Now, it was a great topic, and as you would imagine, we've had a couple of questions come in already. Do you want me to just shout these out to you, Roger?
Yeah, go on then.
Yeah, okay. So first one, what should you do about queen cups, if anything?
Leave them. This is something which has crept into beekeeping, so recently, probably in the last 20, 25 years. If you take the queen cups out, it stops the bees from swarming. Well, take them out, see what happens. And I think you'll find that you go back 24 hours later and the bees have rebuilt them. They've always got them there all the time. One of the combs I showed with 4 queen cells on, I think there's probably 4 or 5 queen cell cups there as well. And, the bees haven't used them. They'll only use them if they need them. What I've never done is count the number of queen cell cups in a colony. That'd be an interesting exercise. It will obviously vary quite a bit, but it'd be interesting to see how many there actually are. And when I say queen cell cups, if you look at the cups, the queens only ever lay in the newer ones. You see lots of older ones that are big and stubby, and the bees just leave them there. Although I've got a sneaking suspicion they may reuse the wax if they need to, but I don't know much about that. But there's absolutely no point whatsoever cutting them out. And I know a lot of people these days are beginning to do that.
So if you cut them out, you're just wasting your time, because the
Yeah.
bees will reform them.
Oh yes, yeah. One thing that I suggest people do, if they want to find things out, one of the ways of doing it is to do it on half your colonies. If, let's say, you've got 6 colonies, cut all those out on 3 and see what happens. You could argue that's a very small sample, which I wouldn't disagree with, but that's one of the ways of learning.
It's a good suggestion. It's encouraging members to go out and learn for themselves.
Yeah,
let the bees tell them.
Yeah, different colonies will very often do different things, and that, of course, you learn as well.
So before we move on from queen cups, Roger, question I've got: if you see a queen cup with an egg in, not a larvae, but an egg, is that a worry? Should you do anything? Should you
Yes, I
cut it
think so.
down?
Yeah, yeah. Have a look, see how many there are. If there's only one, there's a possibility it will be a supersedure. But if, in my experience, if the bees starting to put eggs in cups, needs monitoring. Have a look, see what the space is like for a start. Do you need to add any supers, or is the brood box wood to wood brood? All sorts of things like that. And I think you'll probably usually find that as an issue.
Great.
Unless, of course, you've got Carniolan bees, which tend to be more swarmy than most other bees.
Right. Thanks, Roger. Right. Another question. Well, no, it's more of an observation. This is from Phil O'Shea. Hi, Roger. Every year I have at least 6 colonies with 2 queens in. Last year I had a colony with 3 queens in for 7 to 8 weeks, all working together in September. Sorry, then in September a queen cell came. I didn't follow that. Sorry. I think it's more common than people think.
Yep, dead right. I had one. It's going back, must be pre-COVID now. I had one with 3 queens in July, and I marked them all different colours. Now, in my book, they're all laying. Otherwise, I don't think they'll be producing the pheromone, and the bees wouldn't feed them, so they'd starve. That's my guess. So I think they're probably all laying. Now, if that was the case, I would suspect it will be either mother and 2 daughters, different 2 daughters of different ages, or mother, daughter, and granddaughter. Be interesting to know, but yes, it is quite common. And of course, one of the things is with the queen problems these days, it's likely to happen anyway. And I think because people, I suppose to a degree, I do it as well. You used to be able to go into a colony and you go through 3 frames of brood, no queen cells, just close it down. The problem is, if 2 frames further on, there's just 1 single queen cell, you've got a supersedure situation. So you need to be a little bit more careful now than we did in the past.
I suppose most beekeepers as well would stop looking for the queen when they found the first one. So there's a chance that it happens a lot more than we know, because we're just not looking for 2 queens in a hive.
I've come across an awful lot of beekeepers that can't find their queens.
Never.
They're lucky to find 1, let alone 2.
I've heard you can find them blindfolded, Roger.
Well, yeah.
You can smell them.
Yes, I've heard that as well.
You'll have to show us that one of these days.
No,
right.
Keep that one a secret, I think.
Right. So on to some more questions. You mentioned earlier about shaking all the frames. Someone's asked, would that not detach the queen in the queen cell if you shake too vigorously?
I keep hearing this. Right. It depends what you want to do. I have to say, I shake the bees off, and I don't think I've very often had a problem. Now, I've got quite a lot of colonies, so if I lose a queen, I can easily make up. So I think from the beginners or the small scale beekeepers' point of view, let's say, need to be careful. Now, if you only want 1 or 2 queen cells, pick on a couple that you like, and then just shake the others off how you like. If you want to, those with the queen cells on, if you want to brush the bees off, do so. But I really don't think it's that much of an issue. Excuse me, I've got a couple of border collie puppies here having a bit of a bundle. Right.
Oh, I thought that was your stomach rumbling, Roger.
It was that as well. Right, stop it. Yeah. what do you do?
Right, another question for you, Roger. Do you think
Oh,
that the
yeah. So, well, sorry. Let's go back to the shaking off. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it is actually quite important. And uh, the thing is, from a small scale beekeeper's point of view, they want to cut down as much as possible any problems. So I would say to them, yeah. Don't shake those with the decent queen cells on. You can shake all the others because you're going to destroy them anyway.
Yeah. And if you
So,
wanted to keep the queen cells, I suppose you could cut them out first before shaking the bees off to inspect for
yeah,
others.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then. What if the queen... Oh, no, sorry. I asked the other one. Does the foundation affect queen cells? So in terms of either wax or plastic foundation, does that affect the viability of the queen cell, would you say?
I don't quite know the reason for the answer, but I don't use plastic foundation. At Whisper Green Teaching Apiary, somebody said to us, said to me one occasion, do you know anything about plastic foundation? So I thought, well, no, well, apart from in other colonies, I thought, well, no, we hadn't. So what I did was I bought enough for 4 brood chambers, and we just did not like it. Nobody liked it, even the person who asked. So we don't use it now. Of course, what you can't do very easily is cut queen cells out. But there's ways around everything. You can take a frame with a frame with plastic foundation, and it's got queen cells on. You can take the frame. So that would get over that. Obviously, with foundation or even foundationless, they're going to build them fairly close to natural, and you can usually cut them out if you know where the wires are. But again, if you've got wires, then and you like the queen cell, then just take the frame with the queen cell on it.
Yeah, I think this one references what we were discussing earlier with the queen cups, and we said about cutting them down. You said there wasn't much point. What if the queen cup has lava and jelly? I think that's what they're asking. So should we cut that down at that point?
It depends what you want to do, of course. If you want the queen cells, then let them grow on, but then you've either got to clip the queen's wing or take the queen away. Otherwise, of course, you're going to end up with a swarm. If you have got if you want to prevent swarming, then for some reason you've got to take them out if you leave the queen in there. Otherwise, of course, you'll have a swarm anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Someone's asked for your best tips to cut out and save cells for making up nukes.
Best tips.
Yeah.
Well, if I get a decent colony, I always cut 2, 3, 4 out because either my own or the teaching apiaries. I don't know what we got, 20 colonies there, I suppose. Most of the time, very often you find that you need a queen cell later on. So if you just cut out a couple of queen cells, you're okay. Now, if they're from a really good colony, because we raise our own queens in the teaching apiary, there's very often a queen failure or something like that, or one's got failed to mate in one of the mating nukes. They're very often a queenless one. If I haven't got any what I call artificial queen cells from a queen rearing program, then of course I'll drop one of these in.
Yeah. And how long will a queen cell typically last if you cut it out and pop it in your pocket?
It depends what age it is. The older it is, effectively, the longer it's going to last. I think, especially if it's fairly close to emerging. I don't think I'll put it in my pocket unless I wrapped it up too well. But if you keep it warm, a couple of 3 hours is usually okay. I'm rather reluctant to say too much because all sorts of things can happen. If, let's say, you put it in a car and it's a very hot day, you put it on the front seat of the car, 10 minutes would be enough to cook it.
Mm.
So I think you need to be just a little bit careful with it. But yeah, well, the old guy that taught me originally, he used to wear a cap, and he looked after bees for other people. And if we're out early in the morning, you come across queen cells, he cut them out, put them in his cap, and very often we wouldn't use it till 4 or 5 in the evening. And of course, they were kept warm, and they were okay.
I've heard you say that story before, Roger. So last year, I came across a couple of queen cells and I thought, oh, Roger says I should keep these until I finished inspecting. So I popped it in my top pocket. And as I, I thought I'd broken up there. As I'm going around the apiary, I look down and there's a queen crawling out my pocket about 5 minutes later. And I didn't know what to do with her at that point.
Oh.
So anyway, onwards and upwards.
Put her in a cage with a few workers.
Say again.
Put her in a cage with a few workers.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got to be careful because I reckon if you touch a virgin queen, she won't get accepted.
Oh, right.
If you touch her by hand. Well, put it this way, I've had far more trouble with the colonies accepting a virgin queen if I've handled her. So just try and get her in the cage without handling her.
Right. Next question. What method does Roger use to replace his poor queens with better ones? Does he introduce a new mated queen? And if so, how? Or does he put a frame of eggs in and get them to raise their own or something else?
I'm raising queens most of the summer. So I haven't always, but having said that, I haven't always got queens available. But I suppose with what I do and with for green teaching apiary, I probably raise most years 100 queens, 150, occasionally perhaps 200. It's probably 100, 150. So I've got queens available or in the pipeline, though not necessarily at that time. We have got a queen mating nukes, which are standard frame nukes. We don't use mini nukes. We used to. We're going to have to do it again, I think, because of several people have asked us. So we'll do that. In general, what I would try and do is use existing queen cells. If I use emergency cells, it's because I haven't got anything else. I'm happy to use them if they come from a decent colony. But even with my fairly small numbers, which overall I'm looking after, I don't know, 60 colonies, something like that, might even be 80 during the summer, you'd probably use different techniques than somebody's got 2, 3, 5 colonies.
Yeah. Another question, last one, I think. If we find a capped queen cell, will the colony have swarmed at that stage? If so, can we stop that hive swarming? I think she meant if it hasn't, can we stop the hive swarming and still harvest the queen cells?
I would normally at a stage say, next question, please. But we haven't got any. And the reason I said that is because I don't quite know the situation, and neither does the questioner. It could be that the queen cell has been sealed overnight, and the colony hasn't yet swarmed. I know it might sound easy to do, but the easiest thing to do is to look through to see if the queen is there. Right. Yeah. What you could do is, if you've got a sealed queen cell, the chances are you've got unsealed queen cells following on after that. So take that queen cell out and have one with a smallish larva and see what happens. if after 3 days you don't see any eggs, then the queen had gone, hadn't she? Yeah, it's one of those things that most of beekeeping thinking is on the hoof, and it depends what situation you get at the hive, and it's very difficult to give an answer because there's so many reasons why you derive at that position in the first place. Right. Yeah, we can talk about this, I think. Just because you see a sealed queen cell doesn't necessarily mean that the queen hasn't emerged, because what can often happen is that a worker bee goes in, cleans out the residual royal jelly, and for some reason, and it doesn't make sense to us humans, but for some reason, the other bees just push the lid back up and then lightly, yeah, you've had it.
Do you think they've got a sense of humour, Roger?
Yeah, they got a sense of humour. They sort of seal around the tip, but not very tight. So if you do get that situation, just touch the tip. And if the tip comes away, the chances are you'll find a dead worker upside down in it. Right, you don't know if the queen's gone or not. You can't do any of the usual tricks to find out if the queen is there or not, because they've got a queen cell, so that sort of satisfies them. I suppose what you could do is see if there are any eggs there or not. And if there's no eggs, then the queen is very, very, very definitely gone. What you can't do reliably is look at the number of bees in there. I've tried that time and time and time again, and you very often get it wrong. You just cannot judge it. If you've got a sealed queen cell, the chances are you're going to have unsealed queen cell as well. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any eggs. So you could, I think, probably, depending on the situation, I think I'd probably take out the sealed queen cell and any other that are close to sealing. And you know, if you go back 2 or 3 days' time, and the bees are putting up emergency cells, you know what's happened.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult, isn't it, without knowing all the facts, because we're assuming these are swarm cells, and if it was just 1 or 2, this could be a supersedure, and that would change entirely what you'd do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Of course, that comes into it as well.
Yeah. On that point, do you actually think that there is a material difference between a queen from a swarm or a supersedure cell?
No, I don't think so. I know there's a view that supersedure cells are always good, the best. I'd like to see any evidence on that, because in most of the instances, the queens will probably be from a swarm anyway. Certainly in a managed colony. In a free living colony, I think you've got a different thing, because it's my view that our native bees, before we got involved messing them around, probably didn't swarm anywhere near as much as the modern bee does.
Yeah. And do you think it's imports that have changed that dynamic?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Even more reason to use locally adapted bees then, Roger.
Yeah, probably. But you know, we've got what we've got. We've got to do the best we can with it.
Absolutely.
They're very different bees in different parts of the country that I've come across. You know, and it's only 100 miles or so apart. And, you know, you've got very different bees that survive.
Yeah. Right. Well, that was the last question, Roger. So I think we'll be able to leave it there. But thank you very much for taking the time to take us through swarm cells and supersedure cells and what we can do with them. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Roger?
No, just I'm sure with I don't know what we're down to 130 people or whatever it is. I'm sure we've got some beekeeping teachers out there, demonstrators and mentors and those sort of people. Please, please, please try to encourage the people you're teaching um, to um, to have a look much more closely at queen cells because they are brilliant at giving information about a colony if you can understand it, rather than just rip them out, rip them out, rip them out, which I see an awful lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, people are sending in their thanks, Roger. So thanks again for taking the time, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Okay. And have a good summer, everybody.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Yeah. Goodbye. Good night.